The Galactic Union had lived in peace for many generations. Planets traded freely, species worked together, and war was something people only read about in old records. But far beyond the safe borders of Union space, a new threat began to grow, the Dreth Dominion. The Dreth were an ancient race, strong and proud. Their empire had existed long before humans even reached the stars. To them, the galaxy was theirs by right. So when they saw humans, a young, ambitious species, expanding into neutral systems, they felt insulted. Commander James Ward stood aboard the human ship Vigilant Dawn, watching the map of nearby systems. Red warning lights blinked on the screen. The Dreth fleets had begun to move, spreading toward human colonies that were barely 10 years old. He could feel it, trouble was coming. "They won't stop," said Captain Julia Hayes, standing beside him. She had seen the reports too. "They see us as trespassers." Ward nodded. "We built homes where they saw empty space. That's enough reason for them." For weeks, diplomats tried to reason with the Dreth. Messages were sent, promises made, but the Dreth never replied. They wanted submission, not peace. And when it became clear that humans would not bow, the Dominion made their choice. On a quiet night near the border, the human science station Haven 3 sent out a distress signal. It was studying a nebula, far from any military base. Within seconds, that signal turned into screams. Then silence. When the Union's investigators arrived, there was nothing left but drifting wreckage, glass melted, metal twisted. The crew of over 1,000 men and women were gone. The news spread quickly. Across human space, people watched the images of the destroyed station in disbelief. Children who had dreamed of exploring the stars saw only ashes on their screens. In the command hall of Vigilant Dawn, silence filled the room. Commander Ward stared at the display, his jaw tight. No one spoke. Finally, he said in a low, steady voice, "They fired the first shot." Julia looked at him. "What do we do now?" Ward's expression hardened. "We make sure it's their last." The next days were full of motion. Fleets were assembled, engineers worked day and night, and colonies began building defenses. The Galactic Union sent warnings urging restraint, but the humans knew this wasn't about politics anymore. This was survival. On the Dreth side, the Dominion celebrated. Their leaders believed the humans would beg for peace, that their fragile worlds would crumble. They saw humans as soft, clever perhaps, but weak. They were wrong. Earth's history was filled with wars, disasters, and loss. Humanity had been broken many times before, and every time, it had risen stronger. The Dreth did not understand this yet. They did not know that when humans were cornered, they did not surrender, they adapted. Commander Ward stood before his crew as they prepared to deploy. "They believe we're fragile," he said. "They believe our spirit will break. But they have never faced a people who built their world from fire and chaos. We will not start this war, but we will end it." Julia watched the crew take their positions. The young officers were nervous, but their eyes burned with determination. These were not soldiers trained for centuries like the Dreth. They were explorers, engineers, and scientists who had chosen to fight because they refused to lose their home. The Vigilant Dawn moved through the void, heading toward the frontier where the first Dreth attacks had begun. In the darkness, the ship's engines glowed faintly blue, a small light moving toward a much greater storm. The first battle came without warning. Dreth warships appeared near a human mining outpost, their cannons firing bright streams of plasma. The outpost barely had defenses, but a few armed freighters returned fire, buying time for civilians to escape. When Vigilant Dawn arrived, the Dreth ships turned to face it, confident and unafraid. Ward didn't hesitate. "All batteries fire." The battle that followed was short but fierce. The humans fought with precision and desperation, every shot driven by anger and loss. The Dreth ships were stronger, but the humans fought smarter, using the environment, hiding in asteroids, and striking where it hurt most. When the smoke cleared, 2 Dreth ships drifted destroyed and the others retreated. Humanity had survived its first fight. Word spread quickly. Across the colonies, hope began to replace fear. For the first time in generations, the galaxy realized that the humans, the young, untested race from the small blue planet, would not be easy to destroy. Commander Ward watched the stars outside his window, his reflection faint on the glass. "They wanted a war," he murmured. "Now they'll have one." And somewhere, deep in the cold reaches of space, the Dreth prepared to strike again, unaware that the humans they had angered were not just fighting for victory. They were fighting for every life, every home, every future written in the stars. The spark had been lit. And the galaxy would soon learn that once humanity's fire burned, it would not be easily extinguished. The Dreth Dominion advanced with confidence. Their fleets were massive, their ships gleaming with ancient power. They believed the war would be over in weeks, that humanity would break like glass under pressure. But what they didn't understand was that humans didn't break. They adapted. The first Dreth assault hit the outer colonies. Worlds with small populations and limited defenses. But instead of surrendering, the colonists resisted. Miners welded armor plates from old machinery, engineers built rail cannons out of mining drills, and farmers filled fuel tanks with explosives. Every outpost became a fortress, every worker a fighter. On the colony of Ridgepoint, Commander Julia Hayes stood on a hill overlooking the burning horizon. The Dreth warships darkened the sky, their plasma beams cutting through the settlement. She could feel the ground shake with every strike, but the humans below refused to run. "Status report," she called through her comm. A young voice replied, "Shields at 20%, Commander, but we still have power on the rail cannons." "Then keep firing," Julia said. "We hold the line until the last breath." The Dreth expected fear. What they saw instead was defiance. Every time they captured a human outpost, they found walls covered with handprints and slogans. Messages of courage and fury. "We are still here. We will not yield. This is our home." On another world, Commander James Ward led the fleet's battered ships in a desperate retreat. Their weapons were low, their shields flickering, but they managed to slip behind a gas giant and hide within its dense storms. "If we can't fight them head-on," Ward told his crew, "we'll fight smart. We'll make them chase ghosts." They set traps, mines disguised as cargo, false transmissions to lure Dreth patrols into ambushes. Every victory, no matter how small, gave humanity time to breathe, to rebuild, to fight again. In space, human engineers worked without rest. Old cargo freighters were refitted into warships. Drone miners became bomb carriers. They called these new fleets the Iron Swarm. It wasn't elegant, but it was deadly. Meanwhile, on Earth, factories roared to life. Cities once dedicated to trade and peace began producing weapons. People volunteered in millions. They came from every nation, every colony, united under a single message: survival. The Dreth commanders could not understand it. Their battle reports made no sense. Planets that were supposed to fall in hours held for months. Fleets that should have been crushed fought back harder each time. The humans didn't follow logic. They followed something else, the burning need to protect what they loved. On Ridgepoint, Julia stood inside the command bunker, watching as enemy ships descended through the atmosphere. She wiped the soot from her face and turned to her second-in-command. "If they want this world," she said, "they'll have to dig us out of it." The young officer smiled grimly. "They won't be ready for that." The battle raged for days. The Dreth bombarded the surface, but every time they advanced, hidden traps and counterattacks tore through their lines. When the Dreth finally withdrew, leaving the skies burning, Julia's battered forces still stood. Elsewhere, Commander Ward launched an attack that became legend. His fleet, outnumbered 5-1, turned their ships into living missiles. They lured the Dreth flagship into an asteroid field, then detonated its own gravity engines. The explosion ripped through the enemy formation, scattering their fleet. Ward's ship barely survived, limping through the debris. As news of the victory spread, the galaxy began to whisper. The humans were supposed to be broken. Instead, they were fighting harder with each loss. Dr. Adrian Locke, a scientist turned strategist, said it best during a council meeting. "The Dreth fight with power. We fight with purpose. And purpose is something they will never understand." Weeks turned into months. Each world held longer than the last. Colonies once thought doomed became rallying points. The humans began to strike back, small raids at first, then full-scale assaults on Dreth supply lines. The Dreth commanders began to worry. Their pride turned into frustration. "How do they keep coming?" one demanded. "They lose ships, they lose worlds, and yet they still fight." A young Dreth officer, staring at human transmissions filled with rallying songs and messages of hope, said quietly, "Because they believe they can win." In a quiet moment aboard the Vigilant Dawn, Ward stood at the viewport, staring at the stars. "They thought we'd break," he said softly to Julia, who stood beside him. "But we didn't," she replied. "We got angry." He smiled faintly. "Then we'll give them what they asked for." The resistance had begun as desperation. Now it was something far greater, a fire that spread across every human world, burning brighter with every loss. And for the first time, the Dreth Dominion, ancient and proud, began to fear. Because humanity wasn't just surviving. They were fighting back. The war had raged for months, and though humanity had suffered countless losses, something had begun to change. The Dreth still had power, Their ships were stronger, their weapons more advanced, but they were no longer winning as easily as before. Each human defeat taught a new lesson. Every ambush revealed another weakness. Humanity was learning, adapting, and turning survival into strategy. Dr. Adrian Locke sat in the dim light of the command lab aboard the Vigilant Dawn. His fingers flew across the console, data streams flashing before him. He had been a scientist once, not a soldier, but war had changed him. He wasn't building machines anymore. He was building minds. This AI, he explained to Commander James Ward, doesn't just calculate. It learns. It studies Dreth movement patterns and predicts where they'll strike next, before they even know it themselves. Ward leaned over the glowing screen, watching lines of data form into a web of red and blue lights. You're telling me this thing can outthink an entire fleet? Adrian gave a tired smile. Not outthink. Adapt faster. Within weeks, the new system, called Echelon, was installed across several human fleets. The results were immediate. Where once human ships had been cornered and crushed, now they moved like water, unpredictable, fast, and coordinated. The Dreth called them ghost fleets, appearing and vanishing from sectors with impossible precision. At the Battle of Kellner Rift, a Dreth armada of 50 ships surrounded a small human task force of 12. It should have been a massacre. But Echelon had already calculated their tactics before the first shot was fired. Ward's fleet split into 4 wings, weaving between asteroid fields and using the debris for cover. Missiles struck from unexpected angles. Decoy signals lured Dreth ships into traps. In less than an hour, the Dreth lost 20 ships, a defeat that rippled through their command network like shockwaves. When the battle ended, Julia Hayes reported the results, her voice steady but proud. "We did it, Commander. They're running." Ward nodded slowly. "They'll be back," he said, "but next time we'll be ready." Across the front lines, humanity began to strike back. Colonies that had once hidden behind defense shields now launched coordinated assaults. The Iron Swarm, once a fleet of improvised ships, had become a disciplined strike force. Every battle was recorded, every mistake corrected, and every new trick added to the arsenal. The Dreth High Command grew restless. Their strategies, refined over centuries, were being outmaneuvered by a species barely a century into spaceflight. They had expected fear and submission. Instead, they faced ingenuity and stubborn defiance. In one intercepted transmission, a Dreth admiral snarled, "They think chaos is strategy. It is madness." But another replied quietly, "Madness that wins is still victory." Dr. Locke's AI continued to evolve. It wasn't just predicting Dreth tactics anymore, it was rewriting its own code to respond faster. Soon, human fleets were coordinating across vast distances almost instinctively, reacting to enemy movements as though they shared one mind. In one daring operation, codenamed Echo Star, a small human strike team infiltrated a Dreth weapons depot hidden inside a dead moon. They planted charges and escaped undetected. When the depot exploded, the blast destroyed 6 Dreth supply lines. Julia watched the explosion from the observation deck of her ship. "They'll call this impossible," she said softly. Ward smiled faintly. "That's what they said about surviving the first attack. But victory came at a price. The humans were pushing themselves to their limits. No rest, no safety, always moving. Ships ran low on supplies, and some crews went weeks without seeing a friendly world. Yet morale remained unshaken. Even in the darkest hours, messages from Earth reached the front lines, families sending words of love and courage. "For every world you save," one child's message said, "1,000 hearts beat with you." Those words spread faster than any weapon. They became the anthem of the resistance. The Dreth began to change their tactics, but it didn't matter. Humans were already one step ahead. They didn't just fight with strategy, they fought with imagination. They used Dreth weapons against them, turned their jamming signals into navigation tools, and built weapons from captured technology. In a meeting aboard Vigilant Dawn, Dr. Locke showed the results. "They think they're fighting one enemy," he said, pointing to the holographic map. "But they're fighting every human alive, every mind, every idea working together." Commander Ward watched the map fill with human-controlled systems, glowing brighter than before. "The tide's turning," he said quietly. Julia stood beside him, arms crossed. "And when it turns, it doesn't stop." The Dreth still held power, but now they were reacting, not leading. For the first time, their commanders began to speak in fear. Reports came of Dreth soldiers refusing to fight, whispering of the deathless humans who fought like storms. Dr. Locke recorded a final entry in his log that night. "The Dreth built their empire on control," he said softly. But they don't understand that chaos, guided by will, can be the greatest force of all. We didn't just learn how to survive. We learned how to win. In the cold silence of space, humanity had found its rhythm. And the galaxy for the first time began to wonder, what happens when the most adaptable species in the universe decides it's time to fight back? The Dreth Dominion was losing control. The humans were everywhere, striking at outposts, supply convoys, and shipyards. Each victory weakened the once proud empire. In desperation, the Dreth changed tactics. If they couldn't defeat the humans in space, they would destroy what the humans loved most: their home. The attacks began suddenly. Dreth fleets appeared near civilian worlds, bombarding cities from orbit. Entire continents burned under plasma fire. Millions were lost, but humanity did not surrender. For every city destroyed, another rose in its place. From underground bunkers to orbiting stations, humans rebuilt, refueled, and fought harder. On Earth, the night sky glowed red. The world that had given birth to the species was now the center of the war. Commander James Ward stood in the control center beneath the mountains, surrounded by the hum of distant explosions and flickering holograms. He had seen worlds fall, but he would not see his home die. "Status?" he asked, his voice steady. Julia Hayes stood beside him, her uniform smudged with ash. "Orbital defenses are holding, but barely. We lost 2 satellites over the Atlantic, and the Dreth fleet just jumped to lunar orbit." Ward clenched his jaw. "They're trying to finish it. They think if Earth falls, we fall with it." She met his eyes. "Then we show them they're wrong." Above the planet, the battle was chaos. Human ships, smaller and weaker than the Dreth dreadnoughts, darted through the fire like wasps, striking and vanishing before the enemy could react. One by one, Dreth ships fell, their engines burning white against the black sky. But even victory came at a cost. The defenders were running out of resources, and the planet couldn't survive another assault. Humanity needed more than defense. They needed to end the war, at its source. That night, Ward called an emergency meeting with his officers. "We can't keep fighting like this," he said. "Every day we lose more people. We hit them where it hurts or we die trying." Julia leaned forward. "You're talking about going into Dreth space?" Ward nodded. "Straight to the capital. We take out their command network. Cut off their fleets from leadership. They'll fall into chaos." It was a reckless plan. No one had ever attempted a direct strike on the Dreth homeworld, the heart of an empire that had stood for thousands of years. But humanity had never followed the old rules of war. Within days, the operation began. The mission was codenamed Silent Dawn. Fleets assembled in hidden orbit behind Mars. Every ship carried stealth drives, decoy drones, and adaptive cloaking fields built from captured Dreth technology. There was no speech, no ceremony. Only silence and determination. When the order came, the fleet jumped. They emerged deep within Dreth territory, a place of red suns and metallic planets. The space around them shimmered with enemy signals, but Echelon, the human AI, masked their presence perfectly. They moved like ghosts through the enemy's heart. Ward stood at the command deck watching the holographic map. Target locked. The command nexus. Julia adjusted her headset. "All wings, prepare for synchronized strike. We've got one chance." The Dreth never saw it coming. Within minutes, the human fleet launched precision strikes at communication hubs and data relays. EMP bursts rippled across the Dreth capital's orbit, cutting off every fleet from its central command. Massive battleships, once perfectly coordinated, now turned blind and confused. "Status?" Ward called. Adrian Locke's voice came through the comms, calm but firm. "Their command grid is collapsing. They're attacking each other. They think they're under internal sabotage." Ward smiled faintly. "Good. Let them fight their own ghosts." Then came the final phase, a direct hit on the Dreth War Council's orbital citadel. The structure, a massive ring of dark metal, glowed with enemy fire as human ships descended. Julia led the vanguard herself, piloting a strike craft through waves of enemy defenses. She dodged plasma beams, weaving through debris and explosions. Her co-pilot shouted, "We can't get close." "Yes, we can," Julia said, her voice calm. "We always can." Her ship dived straight through the crossfire, releasing a payload of nanite disruptors that burrowed into the Citadel's power core. A blinding flash filled the sky as the entire structure tore apart in a silent, glowing bloom. From space it looked like a sunrise, the death of an empire. Ward watched from the command deck as the explosion's light reflected off his face. "It's done," he whispered. The fleet began to withdraw before reinforcements arrived. Behind them, Dreth space fell into confusion. Without leadership, their fleets turned on each other, some retreating, others surrendering. On Earth, news of the strike spread like wildfire. Across bunkers, ships, and shattered cities, people looked up at the sky and knew they had struck back. Julia returned to Earth weeks later, exhausted but alive. She stood with Ward at the edge of the old war memorial, overlooking the rebuilding cities. "Did we win?" she asked quietly. Ward watched the sunrise, his expression unreadable. "We stopped them," he said. "But the galaxy won't forget what happened here." He turned to her, his eyes hard but proud. "They wanted to destroy us. Instead, we showed them what humanity really is." For the first time in the war, Earth's sky was quiet again. But everyone knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of something greater. Humanity had proven its strength, its unity, and its will to survive. And from that moment on, the galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. The war ended not with celebration but with quiet. Space, once alive with the sound of battle, was now still. The Dreth fleets had fallen silent. Their ships drifted in the void like broken monuments to a dead empire. The fighting had stopped, but the scars of war remained across every world it had touched, including Earth. Months passed before the news spread across the stars. The Dreth Dominion had surrendered. Their command was shattered, their worlds in chaos. What was once thought impossible had happened. Humanity had won. On Earth, the survivors came out from bunkers and shelters. Cities began to rise again from rubble and ash. Factories that once built weapons now built tools, ships, and homes. The people who had fought so fiercely now worked just as fiercely to rebuild. For the first time in years, the sky was clear. Commander James Ward stood on the balcony of the United Earth Command Tower. Below him, cranes moved across the skyline, lifting new walls and bridges. The air was filled with the sound of construction, the heartbeat of recovery. Julia Hayes joined him, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "I never thought I'd see Earth this peaceful again," she said softly. Ward took a slow breath. "Peace feels strange, doesn't it? Like the world forgot how to be quiet." She smiled faintly. "Maybe quiet is the reward." But beyond Earth, the galaxy was changing. The Galactic Union, who had once viewed humanity with suspicion, now watched them with a mixture of respect and fear. Earth had done the unthinkable, defeated an empire older and stronger than most civilizations combined. The Council summoned Commander Ward to speak at the Hall of Concord, a place where the great species of the Union gathered to decide the fate of the galaxy. As he entered, thousands of eyes, alien and human alike, turned toward him. Whispers echoed through the chamber. Some called him the savior of the Union. Others called him a threat. The council chair, a tall being of silver skin and glowing eyes, spoke first. "Commander Ward of Earth," the chair said, "you have ended a war that could have destroyed us all. But tell us, what does humanity intend to do now? Will you claim the Dreth systems? Will you lead this galaxy?" Ward stood tall in his dark uniform, hands clasped behind his back. The room was silent. He took a moment before answering. "We don't want an empire," he said. "We don't want to rule. We want to rebuild, ours and yours." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The chair tilted its head. "You refuse conquest?" Ward nodded. "Conquest is easy. Peace is harder. We've learned enough about war to know that it never truly ends, unless we make it." He looked around the chamber, his gaze steady. "You saw us as reckless, violent, dangerous. You were right. But you forgot something. We fight hardest not for victory but for peace." The words hung in the air, echoing across the vast chamber. Even those who feared humanity could not deny the truth in them. Julia watched from the gallery above, her heart swelling with quiet pride. She knew what those words meant. Humanity had changed, not into conquerors but into protectors. After the council, Ward returned to Earth. The world was slowly healing. Children played where once there had been ruins. Fields grew again where craters had scarred the land. Humanity, in its stubborn way, refused to fade. Dr. Adrian Locke worked to restore Dreth technology, not as weapons but as tools for energy and medicine. Former enemies came to Earth seeking aid, and instead of vengeance they found open hands. One evening, Ward stood by the sea where the waves rolled against the shore. Julia joined him again, her hair moving with the wind. "They're calling it the War of the Last Shot," she said. "You know that?" Ward smiled faintly. "I've heard worse names. They say you ended it with one speech." He shook his head. "No. Humanity ended it with one choice, to stop fighting." The two of them stood in silence, watching the sunset paint the horizon gold and crimson. Above them, stars began to appear, the same stars they had once fought among. Julia spoke softly, "Do you think they'll ever trust us completely?" Ward watched the stars flicker. "Maybe not. But they'll remember us. Not as destroyers but as survivors. As builders." The sea breeze carried the sound of laughter from nearby, children playing, people talking, life moving on. For the first time in generations the sound was louder than fear. Across the galaxy the story of Earth spread. It was not the tale of conquest the Dreth had feared, nor the chaos the Union had predicted. It was the story of a world that refused to die, and of a people who turned survival into strength. From the ashes of war humanity rose, not as rulers but as a reminder. A reminder that even in a galaxy filled with power and pride, the greatest strength was not in destruction, but in the will to rebuild. As the night grew darker, Ward looked to the stars one last time and said quietly, almost to himself, "They fired the first shot, but we fired the last." Julia smiled beside him. And that last shot ended a war, not with death but with hope. The waves kept rolling. The stars kept shining. And for the first time in a very long time, the galaxy began to heal.